Acts chapter number 27. What was just a minute ago going to be a very long message is now got shortened considerably. In Acts chapter 27, of course, we're continuing our series, finishing up the book of Acts, and we're going to do the whole chapter of 27 this morning, sort of. One event is happening in Acts chapter 27, but there's some things that I'd like to point out. Paul is now being shipped, is going by ship to Italy. And they get on a boat. And they start heading towards Italy, and they hit a storm. By the way, the storm has a name in the scriptures, and you'll find that name in verse number 14. Euroclydon. You know, if the Bible gives a name to a storm, it's bad. So the first part of that word, the euro or euros, the literal meaning behind that word is the east winds. So these winds are from the east. But when he gives the full name Euroclydon to it, that's just some kind of storm. Now, Paul is on his way to Rome. He's on his way to see Caesar. Is there anybody that you can think of that might not want to have Paul the apostle, Paul the first missionary, Paul who has gone and started a whole bunch of churches, have seen thousands and thousands upon a soul saved? Do you think there's anybody that's around that doesn't want that man to meet Caesar? There is. And so that person, that created being, whips up this storm called Euroclydon to try to keep Paul from getting there. Well, that's basically the gist of the whole of chapter number 27 is this storm. Now, I'm going to get in trouble more. I know you guys can't believe that I can get into any more trouble than painting the wall, moving the chairs, you know. And I got, by the way, the boba. So they give you a straw that's that big around so you can suck up those little boba balls right into the back of your throat. Do you know how I know that? I'm drinking my coffee in this straw, and I'm wondering, man, they gave me a milkshake straw. And I'm just drinking my coffee through that, and all of a sudden, blam. So even more trouble than those three things that happened this morning, I'm going to get into more trouble. I'm going to prove to you in this chapter as well why women ought not to drive. Okay, so that's like a sub. That's like a sub. That's like a subtitle. No, that would be like the sub theme. It'd be the sub theme. I'm sorry. You know, I believe I live in the hole. I don't dig one. I just make mine deeper. We're going to pick up in verse number 13. Like I said, that is the overall gist of what's going on with Paul. He's on his way back to Italy, to Rome, to preach to Caesar. And they hit this storm. When the south blew, this is verse number 13, and when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. And so here's what the devil is going to do. He's going to give you something that looks good and feels right to lure you out. Paul had spoken to the centurion. I think we ought to winter here. The centurion listened to the boatmaster and to the captain, and they're like, "Look at the south wind. There's a nice breeze blowing. we're going to be good. Besides the place that we're in, it's not a good place to winter. We're going to try to get up to here. And so the devil will lure us out with something that feels like it's good for us. All right, and so again we see that the south wind blew softly. Supposing that they could obtain their favor, loosing thence, they sailed, they went. Boy, isn't that how the Lord gets us? We feel like this is the right direction. By the way, you notice I keep using the word feel. Where do feelings come from? From our heart. What does the Bible say about the heart? It's deceitful and desperately wicked. And so I want you to make note of how many times in the sentence that I use that I feel like. We need to be careful about what I feel like. Because sometimes we're going to feel like the south wind is blowing. We're going to feel like this is a good direction. I feel like this is the way that God would have me to go. And we start moving in that direction because we feel like that's the right way to go. Then Euroclydon. Right? Let's look at the next verse. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. That's the east wind, Ladon. That's got to be the tempestuous part. By the way, you know what tempestuous means? Big. It's a big one. It's a big one. My wife and I, we like to watch this weather program, Weather Gone Viral, videos on Saturday night. And it shows the storms, and these storms that hit all around the world and everything. Euroclydon would have been one of those things that would have hit. So again, the devil, and I'm likening this to how the devil tempts us. He'll send out that soft south wind, and we'll feel like that's the right thing to do. And then, as soon as we get out into it, man, Euroclydon hits. This big tempestuous storm is going to come into your life. And does the devil want to build you up and make you stronger, or does he want to devour you, like it says in 1 Peter 5:8? Euroclydon. Boy, that sounds like almost like a Godzilla monster, doesn't it? Right? Are you with me on that? Euroclydon. Versus, like it's Mega Godzilla versus Euroclydon. Does that ever work out good for the people? Right? I mean, you see the little guys, the little army guys in their little jeeps shooting little machine guns at Big Godzilla. And what does Big Godzilla do? Yeah, he just steps on them, wipes them off, and out comes fire. But Euroclydon. So you have Godzilla versus Euroclydon. You guys thought you were in church, didn't you? How do you get Godzilla in the scriptures? Well, I'm working on it. Isn't that what Euroclydon sounds like? A big monster coming up. And again, the devil will use something that we feel like is right. Then slams us with Euroclydon. Verse number 15. When the ship was caught and could not bear it up in the wind, here's the first part of why women ought to not drive. We let her drive. Do you guys see that? Do you guys see that? All right, I'm just going to put you and me out of our misery. Let's drop down to verse number 20. All right, so in verse number 15, we let her drive. You guys see that? All right, verse number 20. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small attempt was laid on it, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. So we let her drive, and then all hope that we should be saved should be taken away. All right? I'm done now with that part, okay? Why women ought to not drive, we get that from the scriptures. By the way, no women are going to be in heaven either. I might as well just keep going. You guys heard me say this before, right? I think it's Revelation chapter 8. When they opened the sixth seal, there was silence in heaven for the space of 3 all right, now I'm done digging the tunnel. You know, I have to go home with a woman, you know. You know, that's why I brought up, you know, in my birthday, thank you, that, you know, my wife has allowed me to live this long. She's heard these. All right, so in all seriousness, back to verse number 15. The ship's caught in this storm called Euroclydon. They were working it, trying to save it. Verse number 17, they were taken up. They used helps. They undergirded the ship. They were hoping not to get stuck in the quicksand on the island. They're exceedingly tossed, verse number 18. Verse number 19, we see it was 3 days. 3 days that they were working. Verse number 20, all hope was lost. Verse 21, Paul speaks up. We're getting close to where I want to preach. In verse number 21, after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and have not loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. Think about this for a second. They have been fighting Euroclydon now for 3 straight days. No rest. We're going to see in a little bit, they've been fasting for 14 days. So there's been no eat, no drink, no sleep for 14 days. The last 3 have been a hard fight against Euroclydon. And what does Paul come up and say? Number 1, I told you so. Right? Me and God told you. But you felt like it was okay because there was a soft south wind. You went off of feelings instead of what God said. So first thing Paul says is, I told you. Second thing, he says something strange. Be of good cheer. Be of good cheer. Have you ever felt like you've been in a storm of your own making or of God's making? Doesn't matter. Have you ever felt like you've ever been in a storm like Euroclydon? I mean, when we're in a storm, we're in trials, doesn't it feel like it's the biggest thing ever? And then when we get out of it, we find out it was, you know, it was only an F3 on the Fujita scale. Right, it was only F3 tornado. There's an F5. And it was nothing. You know, it was less than a 1 on that. It was less than an F1 on that. We thought it was an F17. Right? When we're in the storms, they're terrible storms. It feels like Euroclydon. It feels like the greatest thing ever. And then have you ever had that Christian come along? Be of good cheer. Don't you ever feel like just popping them? I hate happy people. I hate happy people. Number 1, they say, I told you so. Number 2, they say, be of good cheer. Everything's going to work out. Do you ever feel like that? I'm sure that's how these guys felt. All right, I'm sure that's how these guys felt. But who was right? All right, we're going to see that they had nothing to fear. Well, let's go on. We're going to see that. Let's just look at it. Verse number 22. I now exhort you to be of good cheer, that there is no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. So what he's saying is, I told you shouldn't have left in the first place. Be of good cheer. None of you are going to die, but we're losing the ship. I'm not comforted. Be of good cheer. I might live, but I'm out in Euroclydon. I'm out in a storm. I don't know what's around me. You know who's there? Verse 23, for there stood by me this night the angel of God. Underline that. And I wrote next to that in my notes, Jesus. Because the next couple of statements, whose I am and whom I serve. An angel will never say that we belong to them, and an angel will never say that we serve them. However, Jesus Christ, we belong to Him. We're bought with a price. We're not our own, and we serve Him. And so there stood with Paul that day Jesus Christ. And Jesus said, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. Somebody doesn't want Paul to talk to Caesar, but somebody wants Paul to speak to Caesar. How important is Caesar's soul? How important is Caesar's soul that the devil doesn't want Paul to preach to him, but Jesus wants Paul to preach to him? How important is the soul of Caesar? Hey, human being, how important is your soul? That the devil wants to destroy any chance for you to hear the gospel, but Jesus Christ is going to do anything He can to get you to hear the gospel. How important is our soul? Man, how worthful? No. How valuable are you in the eyes of Jesus Christ? And how valuable are you in the eyes of Satan that he wants to keep you from Jesus Christ? There's a Godzilla versus Euroclydon spiritual warfare going on for you. How valuable are we? And sometimes, what do we think about ourselves? Well, who am I that God's going to even notice who I am? Who am I? What am I? Who am I that Satan's even going to take note of me? Who? But do you see the battle that's going on? And man, I really like this Godzilla versus Euroclydon thing. I feel like that's from God. Did I just use the word feel? Did you guys catch that? Yeah. Did anybody say inside, he shouldn't be saying feel like? Isn't that what he's talking about? That shouldn't feel like. How important is our soul? Well, we see it here. They're fighting over Caesar. Then he continues on and says, lo, God hath given thee all them which that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer. What are those next words? For I believe God. That it shall be even as it was told me. I believe God. Be of good cheer, I believe God. We're in Euroclydon. We're in this tempestuous wind. We've been fasting, praying, crying out to gods that we don't even believe in for 14 days. And for the last 3 days, we've been in a struggle for our lives. And Paul comes up and says, be of good cheer. Jesus stood in my midst. He said, all of you are going to live. Be of good cheer. We're in this storm. And Paul says, I believe God. Hey, anybody, are you living in this world? You know, living in this world is a storm. You know, living in this world is the biggest storm that you're ever going to be in. You know, I had a microcosm of that world yesterday sitting here during those auditions. I got to see that world. I don't like it. It's vile. That world is vile. And that vile world is an affront to who indwells me. We're in Euroclydon. We're in that right now. But be of good cheer. I believe God. You know, I believe God because it's written in His Word. We were talking about this morning in the men's Sunday school class. I believe God. You know, we ought to believe God. There's some things that are incredible in the Scriptures, aren't there? Number one, God created everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Here's the incredible thing. Do you think God needed to rest? He's like, whoo, 6 straight days I had to work. I'm tired. I need a rest. Do any of you think that it was any kind of physical exertion whatsoever? Because if you go back to Genesis, it says, and God said, let there be light. There wasn't even any work. He spoke it into existence. And I believe it was literal 24-hour days. 6 of them. 6 literal 24-hour days. Well, Pastor, how can you say that? Bible says. First day. Night. Evening and the morning. First day. Evening and the morning. Second day. By the way, I forgot that. In Hebrew, it's not the first day, it's day 1. What do you think day 1 means? All right, day 1. All right, day 1. I mean, in the Hebrew, when it says the morning and the evening were the first day in English, in the Hebrew it says the morning and the evening, day 1. And then it goes on and it says the evening and the morning, the second day and the third day. But that word day, the Hebrew word is yom. All right, you've heard Yom Kippur? All right, yom. That it means day. But anytime it's modified, it can only ever mean a 24-hour period. What do I mean by modified? Day 1. 1 modifies day. 24-hour period. Second day. 24-hour period. Third day. 24-hour period. By the way, if you go into Exodus chapter 20 where the 10 Commandments are, and you're going down through it, and he says you'll work for 6 days, and on the 7th you'll rest, just like I created everything. In 6 days created I all things and rested on the 7th. So if you believe the day-age theory where a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years as a day, you've pulled that verse out of context, by the way. We'll not get into that. But then you have to work for 6,000 straight years before you get to rest for 1,000. All right? David, how old are you? 6,000. Because if you're retired, then you've got to be past your 6,000 years, right? But he's not anywhere close. 74, right? 75, 74. 70, he's in his mid-70s, we'll say. Right? He's got 5,000. 900 and 25 years to go before he gets to rest. So there's that. So you know what? I believe God when he says 6 literal days of creation. By the way, I also believe there was a global flood. I believe that there was a time when man was so wicked on planet Earth that God said, I've repented that I've made man and I'm going to destroy them with water. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. One guy out of all of those guys had grace in the eyes of the Lord. And he had him build an ark. By the way, he made the ark big enough for a whole bunch of people to get on it. Only 8. You want to have your mind blown, go to Kentucky and look at the replica of the ark. And you'll see there's replica of all the animals, 2 by 2 in there. All their food stores, all the fresh water, all the scrolls, their living quarters, and all the area that you walk on was all empty space on the ark that thousands and thousands and thousands of people could have got on. How many people got onto the ark? 8. And there was a flood. The windows of heaven opened up. The fountains of the deep broke up. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights this way. The fountains of the deep broke up this way. It destroyed the world, killed every living thing on dry land. How do I know that? Have you ever been up on Mount Lemmon and found a seashell? You ought to go look, because you will find seashells on top of Mount Lemmon. How tall is Mount Lemmon? 9,000 something feet, right? Huh. How did seashells get up there? By the way, where's the closest ocean to Tucson, Arizona? Where's the closest body of water? There's like a Rose Lake up there, which is a pond. You got Lake Havasu, it's way over there. That's a pretty good size. You got Rocky Point down to the south of us. That's the Gulf of California. That's a pretty good size. But that's 4 hours away. It's kind of hard for a seashell to blow for 4 hours in the wind. And by the way, that would be one. How many seashells do you think you can find up on Mount Lemmon? Yeah. It's almost like it was underwater. It's almost like there was a global flood that destroyed everything. I believe God. Children of Israel are moving out of Egypt. There was those little 10 things that happened. Those little 10 minor things that happened in Egypt, destroyed Egypt. They're coming out of Egypt. They're walking out. They come up to the Red Sea. The army of Pharaoh is behind them. The Red Sea is in front of them. And what happens? Well, this strong wind comes by and blows off the triangle of the water, the little bit of water, and the children of Israel were able to walk across the Reed Sea, and it just cut off the corner. That's what History Channel says. That the Reed Sea came like this, and the Lord blew the water back like this so the children of Israel can walk in a straight line. Well, the Bible says something about the Red Sea. Did you notice I said Reed Sea? Okay, thank you for catching that. But the Bible says Red Sea, number 1, and then it says heaping walls of water on both sides. That sounds like heaping walls of water. I believe that the Lord opened up the Red Sea. Jonah got swallowed by a whale. Jesus came the first time, walked on earth, died, was buried, and rose again the third day for me. I believe in salvation through Jesus Christ. I believe Jesus is coming back. I believe there's a second coming. You know what? I believe there's a heaven, and I believe there's a hell. I believe God. I believe God. You know how I believe God? You know why? I have His Word, and He said it. And it doesn't matter what man thinks. It doesn't matter what man feels. Because you talk about Jonah with somebody, and they're like, yeah, you know what? No, that never happened. Well, the Bible says. Well, the flood was a local flood. It just flooded out that area. Well, how do you get seashells on top of Mount Lemmon? How close to Mount Lemmon is, how close is Mount Lemmon to Mount, oh man, the name just left me, Ararat. Yeah, it's a heap of miles, right? That's a big local flood, isn't it? Well, I'll say it was local. I'm going to say it was a local flood. I'm trying to make a globe here. All that to say, Paul believed God when Jesus was standing in his midst and said, be of good cheer, you're all going to make it, but the boat's not. And Paul said, I believe God. You know what? I believe God too. And you, as Christians, we ought to believe God. When God says it in his word, we ought to say, well, that's right. God's right. Every man's a liar. Let me tell you what I have to do now for Hebrew, and it kind of fits. I find out what the parsing for the verb is. I find out what it is because Bible Works, my program, tells me what it is, but then I have to go back and prove it. Then I have to go back and do the work. So I find out what it is, and then I have to go back and do the work. You know what? I believe God. So I believe that he says there was a flood, so now I have to go back and do the work, read the scriptures and say, well, it said there was a flood. Oh, by the way, I'm finding seashells on Mount Lemmon. That must be a clue. They're finding fossils of fish in mountain ranges. That's a clue. Do the work. I believe God. All right, let's finish it up. Down to verse number 42. So in between verse 25 and verse 42, they crash the ship. They throw out 4 anchors. The anchors are dragging. They're starting to sound. What that just means is they're dropping down a rope with knots on it, and they're finding out the depth of the where the bottom is from the ship. And they find that it's 20 fathoms, and then it's 15 fathoms, and then it's 10 fathoms, and then it's 5 fathoms. They're finding that the land is coming up to meet the ship, so they're getting close to a land mass. They finally notice that there's land. They see that there's a river that the boat can go into, but two oceans are meeting. 2 seas are meeting at that place. And so they cut the sails, and they just let the boat go. And the boat goes in between those 2 seas, and the seas drive them right into the dry land, into that riverbed. And now that's where we are at verse number 42. And here's what the soldiers say. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But what did Jesus say to Paul was going to happen with everybody that was on the boat? Yeah, they would live. But the centurion, verse number 43, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on board, some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass. Look at these words. What did Jesus say to Paul? You're going to be safe, and all these that are with you are going to be safe, but not the ship. Then verse number 44, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship, and so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. The ship didn't make it, but every single one of them did. I believe God. Doesn't matter if you're in the biggest storm ever, believe God. If he tells you you got to go see Caesar, believe God, you're going to see him. Even if he hasn't told you, whose hand are you in? John chapter 10, you're in his hand. Believe God. Believe God. Let's not get into the place when trials come into our lives. Let's not get to the place where we're blaming God. God, why are you doing this to me? What did I do to deserve this? We ought to never get to that point. But we ought to believe God that he saved so many before that he's going to save us too. And by the way, if he doesn't, where are you going to be? I'm going to be in heaven. Ooh, threaten me with heaven. Ooh. Right? So he's got your back. He's going to save you here. Or he's got you there. Either way, he's got you. Believe God. Believe God. Let's stand to our feet with our heads bowed and eyes closed. Jordan's going to put on a hymn of invitation.